Okay, good morning, everybody. For those of you that were in the previous session, I thank you for sticking with us for another 40 minutes. Today, we are going to be talking about seamless authentication with Force.com Canvas, how you can leverage Canvas to not only give you context into Salesforce and give you the Salesforce OAuth, but also get into your Canvas application automatically. Do have to show you our safe harbor for those of you who have not seen it over the past 4 days. This is saying Salesforce is a publicly traded company, and as such, if you are making purchasing decisions, please make those decisions based on what is generally available in the product today and not what is forward-looking functionality. If you have any questions about what is forward functionality versus what is GA in the product that we're showing today, feel free to ask me at the end, and I can definitely tell you. I'm almost positive everything we're showing you today will be GA today, so we shouldn't have any forward-looking statements, although we may. Who knows? My name is Jay Hurst. I'm a senior product manager with Salesforce.com on our platform side, specifically for Force.com Canvas. With me, I have Chris Jolly, our principal developer on Force.com Canvas. This is the brains behind everything we're going to see today and everything that we've delivered with Canvas. Sorry, rest of the Canvas team. Okay, so providing the seamless login into multiple applications through Canvas or through any other system out there can be difficult. Ultimately, you want to provide a very streamlined interface for your end users. You want them to be able to access multiple applications without having to get a bunch of pop-ups and log in here, log in there, remember this password. You want it to be very simple and easy for them. So by show of hands, how many of you have multiple applications working with Salesforce today? Great, you're in the right place. How many have attempted to manage the login into your application through Force.com Canvas? A couple people, okay. How many of you would like to make that more seamless and easier for your end users? Okay, great. So let's jump right in with Canvas authentication. One of the things to note is that there are two sides to the authentication. With Canvas, we're allowing you to bring your external application into Salesforce, and we give you the login into Salesforce itself. So your app can call back into Salesforce as the running user. We manage that through Canvas seamlessly. However, a lot of people don't understand that there's another side, getting into your application in the first place. So we provide signed request or OAuth Webflow. This is what we do to give you access into Salesforce. Now, logging into yours can be handled in a number of ways. For every developer here, there's probably 10 different authentication schemes out there and how you determine who the end user is. From no authentication or basic authentication, user password, SAML, some homegrown SSO. There's a ton out there, and there's a lot of ways to manage it. But really, like I said, the end users just want the access. They just want to be able to get the data where they need it. They don't want to have to worry about remembering passwords left and right. So when we think about Canvas with OAuth Webflow, this uses our standard OAuth 2.0. This is very baked in with our connected apps framework. So if you've ever done a connected apps or you've used even the Salesforce One application, you'll see that very first time you get the allow or deny. Do you want to give this application access to your Salesforce instance and to act on your behalf? Think of it as a valet key. You can give them access to some of the functionality that's determined based on that flow, but not all of the functionality. They don't get unrestricted access. Now, the Canvas app in the OAuth Webflow, the Canvas app manages that authentication. So rather than signed request where we give you the authentication, the first thing you're going to get from us is a GET, and you're going to have to kick the user into the Webflow. So by setting the OAuth Webflow as your access method, you're saying, I want to manage the authentication into Salesforce myself. Really don't recommend this a lot for new applications because signed request, frankly, is just a bit easier. But if you have an existing application that already connects into Salesforce, you're already using a connected app and an OAuth framework to get into Salesforce, this is an easy way in. We allow it as well. Essentially what happens is after the OAuth flow happens, after your application has kicked the user into the flow, the user's accepted it, then your app can make a JavaScript call through the SDK to say, give me the context of who the user is. So essentially the first thing you do is establish authentication, establish a trust, then you ask for details. On the other hand, Canvas with signed requests, think of this as OAuth on the server side. So we do the OAuth for you. You don't have to manage it back and forth. We generate it all on the server side when the user accesses the Canvas app, and then we post it all to you instantly. So with that post, what you do is you break it down. We have methods to allow you to do that. And instead of having to afterwards do a get context, we give you the context up front, including the OAuth token. Again, this is less chatty. You don't have to do the OAuth flow. You don't have to have the user approve it. They just get the access right away. Preferred and default method. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into the demo. I have Chris Jolly here to help us out. He looks excited about it. What we're going to do is we're going to show you the standard signed request example. You've probably seen it, but we'll just set the stage. Chris?
Thanks. Thanks for all. What's that?
No, don't worry about
it. Thanks for all coming on the last day, early morning, talking about security. So you guys are dedicated. Took me a bit to get up. All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about. So the sign request is what ultimately we give to that third party. We give you a big post, a big JSON post. So you're in there. You have user context information, organizational context information, context about the page you're on, maybe the account they're viewing, stuff like that. But most importantly in there, what you guys are concerned about is we give you an Oauth token. And new as of, I can't remember what release, but it's in there now. We also give you a refresh token. We didn't used to do that, kind of got security to approve us to do that, but we give you a refresh token. Your admins can still revoke that at any point in time. But the nice thing about that is if your OAuth token expires, you can use your refresh token to get a new OAuth token. If you're not seeing your refresh token in the sign request, it's because you didn't set your OAuth scopes correctly. There's an OAuth scope that says, please give me an OAuth token. I forget the name of it, but it essentially has the word refresh token in there, and that's the one you have to assign to your app. So if you're not seeing that, make sure that you do that. What the heck's going on here?
Escape.
Escape. Thank you. Not that big of an escape. I guess.
What do you want?
I guess a browser. Okay, a little funky here. So I'm going to show you a demonstration. Let me first talk about some of the other things we've added. I want to set the stage for the demo. So we talked about that sign request, how that gives that third-party app an OAuth token for talking back to Salesforce. Well, that's cool, but ultimately you want to authenticate into your website, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. SAML happens to be one of them, and Salesforce completely supports SAML, so we've got that set up where you can click that, and I'm going to show you a pretty cool example of that working. There's also other third-party types of single sign-on too, but what we found was the number one reason why we kind of didn't support that was because typically when you do a single sign-on, you go to a URL, it doesn't have the cookie, it bounces you over here, it maybe makes you authenticate there, then bounces you here and bounces you there, and then finally bounces you to the page with the cookie. But the problem is, with all that bouncing around and those redirects, those are gets. So now you've lost your post. You've lost that signed request, and ultimately I've lost my client ID and I've lost my OAuth token. So we're giving you two new methods in the SDK, refresh sign request and repost, and they take no arguments. So if you say refresh sign request, it's a little JavaScript call, it's real quick, it gets you back the sign request on demand. Now, it is secure. If you go over, it'll only give it for that domain that is the same domain as the Canvas URL. If on your thing you have a link and you go to evil.com, it will not allow you to get that will not allow that domain to get the sign request. So if you're doing any hops around, that's the reason why you can't get it. You have to stay on your same domain. The URL, the path can be different, but ultimately the domain has to be the same. That's the only one we will give the refresh sign request to. So the refresh sign request call is more of a JavaScript thing. It's, okay, I want to do this from JavaScript and get the sign request, and then I can decode it and get access to everything, my OAuth token, most importantly. We also give you another method called repost, that will ultimately then repost back to the Canvas URL. In that case, if you're doing more of a server-side approach, it's more ideal there. So we're posting back to the Canvas app. If you've got server-side code that processes that sign request, that's useful for that. So again, 2 new methods to help you out. We're not guaranteeing this will work with every single sign-on solution, but with those 2 methods, it's really going to help your ability to make sure you can get your sign request again and you didn't lose it. Now the other thing I want to show you is there's a great blog, and I think we have the URL at the end of this, where we walk you through essentially the example. I'm going to enhance the example that we're going to do, but there's a good blog post that'll walk you through setting up SAML, both identity provider and service provider. So there's 2 ends to the SAML. There's the identity provider that says, hey, this is Chris, and the service provider trusts the identity provider, so when he says, hey, this is Chris, you believe them, and you ultimately sign it in. If you go out there's lots of implementations of SAML. There is some open source code there, but ultimately, you download the certificate from the identity provider onto the service provider, and with that certificate, and when they send you that, you know that this did come from that person, and I trust them. So when they tell me it's Chris, I'm going to believe it's Chris, and then I'm going to authenticate it on my side. Now, there's nothing unique with SAML that will automatically log you in. If you're writing this yourself out on Heroku or something, you ultimately have to do the login yourself. But it's really that the identity provider is saying, hey, this is Chris, trust me, go ahead and log in. So again, there's a great blog out there that'll walk you through how to set all that up. This isn't a SAML presentation. This is more how we can use SAML or some of the different single sign-ons. So the first step with doing SAML is I'm going to do an example where we're using Salesforce to Salesforce, because since Salesforce allows you to set an org up as an identity provider, and it also allows you to set up an org as a service provider, it just gives a nice example where I can talk to one to the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my main parent org be the identity provider, and that is going to have a Canvas app in it that is going to reference a Visualforce page in the service provider org. So that Visualforce page in the service provider org is going to show up in my identity provider org. And so now I'm kind of combining the results of 2 orgs. So this is a little bit of an example of how I can kind of combine the data of 2 orgs and surface that.
So, and to Chris's point, it's key to remember. So the service provider org that we're using today is a Salesforce org. This could also be a Heroku instance out there. It could be your own internal application. It could be anything that knows how to speak SAML and that trusts Salesforce as an IDP. We're using Salesforce both as the IDP and the SP in separate orgs, just because it does some cool demos, which we'll see, but also it's a little easier to set up from end to end because you don't have to program a SAML service provider. We kind of do that for you. But every time we say service provider, just know that this could be a non-Salesforce application. Okay, so to do this, the first thing you need to do is SAML and Canvas are both part of the connected app stuff. So where you go into create apps, I'll go in there, I'll scroll down to my apps, I'll edit my app. I just called my service provider app, call it whatever you want. This is what's new. So you set up SAML within here, and ultimately that whole blog will walk you through how to do this. It's straight. It's not. You'll do it, but it's not. You might not know what you're doing, but unless you're a security expert. But it does walk you through step by step on how to set up the SAML. The other tricky thing here that is not in that blog is, at least I ran into it, is it tells you to put the domain of the Visualforce page in there, actually the domain of the app. Now, if you look at,
you have to set up my domain for each app. And what I set up was Jolly at IDP, and I also have a Jolly SP. And normally my domain for that is jolly.spdev.mydomain.salesforce.com. But if I put the URL in there for the start URL and the Canvas URL, it looks a little different. And the reason being is Visualforce pages are served up from a separate domain. So the easiest way to do that is hit the URL, the Visualforce page directly from the service provider, look at the new URL, see that, and copy that in there. That's one thing that's not in the blog that I ran into that was just threw me for a snafu. But if you do that, it works fine.
And the blog will be updated by the time you read it, so okay. It's in the process now.
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're setting up SAML. I'm selecting this Federation ID, and what that means is there's a lot of different ways to link up users. So if I have Chris at IDP.com over here and Chris at SP.com over here, how do I know that these are the same users? And there's different ways. You can use username, you can use user ID. I'm using what's called a Federation ID. So when I go over to the users, if I look at my users, manage users, I actually just have a user here called Pat, and if I go in there, I have a Federation ID of Pat1234. And then over on the service provider side, if I have that same Federation ID, that's how it goes. These are the same two users. Now, there's other ways to do this, like I said, email address, whatever. I just chose Federation ID.
But this is a key step with SAML, specifically in authentication. You have to tell the identity provider and the service provider how they're connecting the users together. And you do need a user on each side. In this case, we have a user from Salesforce, which Canvas is using, but ostensibly there's going to be a user in your Canvas app as well. So how do you let the system know that they're the same person? And in this case, we're using Federation ID.
So these are my normal. Is everybody already set up a Canvas app before, and they kind of know what Canvas apps are? Okay. So here's where I normally set up my Canvas app. And what's new here is this SAML initiation method. And it can take none, identity provider, or service provider initiated. The default's none. But if you choose identity provider, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to send the first request off to the identity provider, which happens to be the parent org in this case, and then that will ultimately end up doing the redirect and with the trust and all that stuff to your service provider. If you say service provider, it's the service provider initiated. So I first do a request to them. If you don't have the appropriate cookie, it starts bouncing you around. Identity, for Salesforce to Salesforce orgs, identity provider works better, because they both work, but service provider, you have to disable the login page, because when you set up a service provider, you can set the different ways on how I want to. Do I want to use Twitter? Do I want to use LinkedIn? Do I want to use the login page? Do I want to use the identity provider? So if the only option is identity provider, it doesn't provide anybody with that option. The reason being, if you don't disable the login page on the service provider, it will then try to iframe in that login page on the main parent org, and the login page just cannot be iframed in. There's restrictions there. It won't let you iframe in a login page for security reasons. So if you set this up with service provider and you're like, what the heck, nothing's showing up here, you don't even get an error in the console log. You do on Chrome, I think, but not the other debuggers. You have to disable the login page. So identity provider, if you're going Salesforce to Salesforce, works better. Now, if your service provider is your own organization or your own, it might not have those limitations, and service provider might be the way to go. But you have two options there on which way to go.
And we are fairly smart here. So as you saw, Chris set up the SAML pieces up top. If you don't have SAML set up on the top section of this, you won't actually be able to set the SAML initiated method. So we'll only enable it if there's SAML definition up top.
Yep. And the other thing to note here, my Visualforce page is served from the domain of Visualforce. So, and how do you find that out? Well, you can go over to the service provider, hit the Visualforce page, and watch the URL change above, cut and paste that, and throw that in there. Again, that's the part that's not in the blog, just to reiterate that, and because it can be frustrating. Okay, so I've got my Canvas app set up. blah, 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 an identity provider initiated. What do I want to do on the service provider side? So I'm using a different browser here because of different login. Let me make that a little bigger. The service provider side. So one thing on the service provider side, you go under security controls and you go into single sign-on settings. And this is where you set up the My SAML. This is all part of the SAML configuration. Again, that blog walks you through in detail about this. I chose Federation ID. You will upload the certificate of the IDP through here. Okay, so that's what you kind of got to do to get the service provider set up. Again, the blog goes through that. The only other thing I really have over on the service provider side is I don't have a Canvas app because I'm just referencing a Visualforce page there. So if I go to Develop, I go to Pages, I can see I've actually got 2 Visualforce pages here. And we'll start off with the kind of the simple one. And if we want to just drop into some of the code here, what we can see is I'm just going to provide, this is very simple to get the point across. You don't have a laser, do you? Yeah.
Top.
Top, top.
Top.
Okay, thank you. I'm just displaying, this is a Visualforce page, so doing this notation, you can get the first name, last name of the user, the org, and the API session ID. This is all the information in my service provider org. So now, oh yeah, okay, I got an API session key, I can call API on that side. And then this is the identity provider stuff. Well, I haven't filled that in yet, so what I'm going to do is after the bouncing goes around, I've lost that. So I'm going to have this little button here that calls refresh SIME request. And what does refresh SIME request do? Well, it's up here, and all I'm calling is refresh SIME request. I give it a callback. So this is an asynchronous call. I get a callback with my SIME request. If the status is 200, I can split up my SIME request, parse it, and then I update my display with the SIME request object. And all I'm doing here is doing a document, get element ID, replacing the inner HTML with the Oauth token and stuff like that. So let's just quickly run this and see what it looks like.
And so what we're trying to do again with this, just to set the stage while Chris goes, is from the identity or provider org, you're going to open the Canvas app. We're going to automatically log into the service provider org, generate a Visualforce page in that org, and display the Visualforce page inside of the identity provider org. So it's a simple example on what it looks like, but essentially what we're doing is we're connecting 2 orgs, displaying Visualforce from the second org into the first org, and allowing the user to interact with it. So you can start to picture some really interesting things here where you have multiple orgs and you're sharing Visualforce pages and information between them.
Okay, so I'm logging out as admin, logging in as my special user that I've set up with the Federation ID. I'm just going to go to the Chatter tab where this is. I'm going to log this in. I'm going to hit this URL. This has now invoked the Visualforce page on the other org and brought it in. Now, I showed you how I had all that information, and I've got to click this now to update my refresh SIME request. And boom, I get it. That's a little JavaScript call, comes back, and now I've got an Oauth token for my identity provider, and I've got an Oauth token or an API session, whatever, for my service provider. I'll show you a better example here. But so what's a real use case for this? I might want to, how about if I want to like combine, I've got 2 organizations. Anybody here have multiple organizations within Salesforce? Okay. Common request is I want to kind of combine some of that data. How about a chatter feed that pulls my chatter from this org, my chatter from that org, kind of does a quick little bubble sort and displays that chatter in order from the different orgs, kind of a combined feed, all right? I also don't want to have to hit the refresh SIME request. I want that to happen kind of automatically. So I've got a different example for that. I'm going to log out, log back in as my admin. going to go down to my Canvas app, and I'm just going to change the Visualforce page to got a new Visualforce page. I also need to change the start URL up here in the SAML settings, the same thing. All right, so let me log out as the admin. Log back in as my and now I go to my Chatter tab. Now I hit this new Canvas kind of app. That's a different same Canvas app, but different Visualforce page. I've coded this up for mobile, and we'll show you in mobile in a second. But now I've got different posts from different orgs. So if I go over to my, let me log out here. Let me go in as my service provider. And I'm just gonna, no, I was there. Just to show that this does really work. If I share a post, now I go back to my identity provider and I link that up, I should see that this does really work in there. So I was able to kind of combine Chatter feeds from both into one other. Now this isn't limited to Chatter. You can use any of the API, whether you could bring in accounts, leads, whatever, combine them to whatever. So this is kind of the first step towards, you know, getting a little bit of cross-org pollination going.
And where the power will really come out in this is if you think about it, if you start to tie in our eventing mechanism where you can send a message from a Canvas app into the parent org, now you can start to actually pass information from your Visualforce page in org 2 to make a record change in org 1. So you can start to really combine data together, combine functionality, and start to blur the barriers a little bit between your organizations. In this example, you can also do the exact same thing with your own application.
So one thing I want to just walk you through this to show it on mobile. What I'm going to do is add this to it. Well, I've already got the mobile nav here, so that'll show up on mobile on the left-hand side. The only other thing you got to do is with this is you go to mobile navigation. I've got it right there, so that'll show up underneath the hamburger, the stage left. It'll show up. It should show up as the fourth one down there. So that's how you make things. That's one of the ways to make something show up in mobile. It's going to cancel out of there, and then I'm actually going to go to mobile. And if I go to this hamburger here, I've got that there, and I click on it, and it should show up. So now I've got a nice little mobile app for kind of combining my Chatter feeds from two different orgs. Again, you could put whatever you want in here. So. Okay, let's look at the little bit of the code. I've got a, can I make this big? How do I want to blow that up. So if you want to go to this link here, can't blow that up. Let me just put it in Word or something. You can add it to the You guys see that? Let me make it bigger. 500%. There we go. So if you go there, I've got the example of this little bit of people are rocking out next door. That's the code for this. So if you want an example of how I did that, and ultimately what I did was, let's just go down to the bottom. I'm just calling the refresh SIME request right soon as the document is ready. So I'm using, I can use there's a Canvas on ready, but there's also a jQuery on ready. It just tells me when the document's ready. So inside, I've declared a couple different functions. I say get my service provider posts. I have get my identity provider posts. I have a quick little bubble sort there to sort by date. And I have something that updates my results, just puts divs in my little thing there. But then this is the refresh SIME request that I'm calling soon as the page is loaded, because I've lost that once I've done the identity provider kind of redirects. And the only thing I'm setting up here, these are some jQuery deferred type kind of things, so I can say when my service provider posts are asynchronous and so are my identity provider posts. So I send off 2 requests, wait for the last one of those 2 requests to finish. They both get sent off at the same time, and when they're done, ultimately, I do a bubble sort on them, and then I update my results. So some code there, as is. Feel free to do it. The code's a little bit dissimilar for the identity provider. I use the Canvas cross-domain bridge to get there. So this is similar to the jQuery AJAX call. But this one, if you tried to make an AJAX call or an XHR from within that domain, the cross-domain would fail. And that's why we give you this part of the SDK to allow you to talk back to the parent domain. So I make my API calls that way, and then just through, this is the way jQuery does it. I set that up, and I get my results that way. So quick little demo there. What else do you want to cover?
I think that's it.
Review.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So hopefully that kind of made a little sense. I know we covered it. It's a big topic, SAML and authentication and how it really works, and we couldn't dive into the nitty-gritty on how to set up SAML. But again, the idea is that you have an identity provider. Who am I getting my identity from? And you have a service provider. Who am I getting the service from? Service provider is giving us a Visualforce page in this case, and the identity provider is providing the single source of identity truth there. So we kind of talked over this rather than showing the slide, but essentially you can link Visualforce pages between orgs. Like Chris said, we have a link to the SAML blog post, which goes through this in a very great deal of detail. It's I think 12 pages long in one big long thing. So, and then we did the cross-org Visualforce setup. Okay, so what did we learn today? Hopefully we learned how to manage authentication with Force.com Canvas, both using the signed request coming into your Canvas app so you can get back into Salesforce, and also how to start leveraging the SAML functionality within Salesforce to automatically log into your org. Again, there's a ton of different authentication methods out there. There's no way we could support all of them, so what we choose to support is, for the Salesforce side, OAuth, SAML, and then anything that you want to use. Again, we're using browser technology, so any way to authenticate into your application through the browser will continue to work. So if you do have a login, username, password, and that's what you want to continue to use on your application, you can do that. The result will be that you'll have a username and password login screen when they first open the Canvas app. If you want to use a more seamless method, you can use SAML like we showed. We also have customers and partners who are using their own home rolled, where they take something from the context like the user ID, verify that that user ID exists in their system, and then do an auto login on their system. There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a session today at 11:30 in the dev zone where we'll have a partner actually showing this. So they dive a little bit more into detail about how to actually do kind of a home-rolled authentication scheme. That's it. So before we get to the Q&A, we do have a couple more resources. Like I said, we have the 11:30 session, Connected Apps Canvas on the S1 platform. There's another session right now, so I don't think you're going to make that one. But we have our integration workbook in the dev zone. It has a great example of a Canvas app, kind of gets you up and running with the standard warehouse application using Heroku and Salesforce. We have our developer page there. You can always email or tweet me, and We are recording every Dreamforce session this year, so they all will be on YouTube later. Feel free to check this one out again if you missed something, or feel free to check out all the ones that you couldn't attend, because we do have over 1,400 sessions this year. So with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. If you have any questions, please step to the mics in the center, and we can get those turned on. If they're not, you can fire away.
Yeah, at our organization, we're using Active Directory Federation services. And when we go to our domain, we get our credentials page from Active Directory instead of the login.salesforce.com. So our users don't even have Salesforce passwords. They're using our Active Directory. And we've recently, where we're about to put in production our quote system, which is web-based, into our domain that is using Active Directory NTLM authentication. So in our use case, it took us 3 days going through the blog to get the SAML working through Active Directory Federation services. So the hardest part is there's just so many options. Just finding the right blog to go to and setting it all up is difficult. So the last piece that we need is we need the Canvas app to authenticate internally in Salesforce using the same token. What would be the easiest choice for path of making, we're going from Active Directory to Salesforce, and Salesforce is authenticated. Now we're calling back into our domain, and we're getting credential pop-ups for our Canvas app, which means obviously it's not working on mobile because Android doesn't support that. And so we need to figure out a way to pass that token all the way down to our site. Well, can you give me a hint to what we should use?
So if you're passing a token, if you need to actually get information that Salesforce currently has, does Salesforce know how to get into your system or no?
We're getting signed parameters. So we see user context, we see objects like opportunities and quotes and stuff coming into our app, but we don't know how to actually authenticate our app in the Canvas app.
Sure, so we might need to talk a little bit after to get a little more context, but essentially when we post to you, if you're using the standard sign request, the two options that you have are either to take information from that post and leverage that information to log you into your side, which is custom to you. So if Salesforce had a token that your site understood, you could inject that as a parameter, and then through the JavaScript SDK, you break that parameter out and log into your system. Other things that I've seen is if there's a browser cookie that kind of carries over the session when you're going website to website, there can be some issues because you're going over secure connections, you're popping into iframes, things like that. So we can definitely connect after and hopefully get a little more better answer, I guess.
One would think it would be easy, but it is an option, I would assume.
Yeah, well, easy's very relative, right? I wish I had a button that could just say work with everything. Unfortunately, they haven't invented it yet.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, I joined the session a little bit late, but what got me excited was about, Salesforce talking about collaboration across various orgs in form of chatter, right? Mm-hmm. So are you planning to create that as a product where it would support out of the box? And my next question is let's say you have cross-org collaboration. How do you take that and expose that to an external application, right? Because most of the time, the users are not within Salesforce, but they're, say, outside within our own applications. How do you envision that also getting, in future, take the collaboration across various orgs, expose that into an external application?
Sure. So the first question, are we looking to productize cross-org chatter? I'm not on the chatter team. I know that they've been really working to break this challenge out because we're having more and more customers run into this. They are working on a very supported cross-org solution, which will not include Canvas. It'll be completely native to the Salesforce code. I don't have information on any kind of release date or anything like that. I definitely encourage you to reach out to the chatter team for that information. I know it's on their roadmap. As far as kind of bringing all the collaboration from Salesforce and getting it out to your application. Did I understand that correct? That if I have information in Salesforce, I want to bring it into my
That's correct. That's right.
So that's kind of the reverse of Canvas in a lot of ways. Canvas is designed to bring your applications into Salesforce and allow Salesforce users kind of a full view. If you're not a Salesforce user, it kind of predicates removes the access for Canvas. So I'm not sure that there's a Canvas solution there.
I think just plain old connected apps, but you'd have to go through the OAuth flow for
Yeah.
each one you want to bring in, and then ultimately you get a refresh token. Once they've done that, you'll have the refresh token. You can store that on your side, and you can do it from there on.
But that said, it does require that your end users have access into Salesforce. So
Yeah, but in case of the tokens, right, you have your own session management as well, and then you have the tokens. So how do you combine both the sessions together in terms of, that's, I think, another fundamental challenge as well.
it can be difficult. I mean, this is kind of the modern problem that we're seeing a lot, especially with website mashups. We got 4 seconds. I'll have to end. I'm definitely interested in continuing the conversation if you want to hang out after. But thank you, everybody. We definitely appreciate your time, and hopefully you had a great Dreamforce. Have a great day.